Hi friends, Lorelei Black here from Blade Broom. Thank you so much for joining us for this witchy and wonderful magical discussion. This week we're actually going to be talking about clothes and jewelry and the accoutrement of witchcraft that you wear upon your person when performing it. So let's talk about that. Okay, so when we're talking about the robes and regalia and jewelry and all of the fixins that you might wear upon your person as a witch, even as a traditional witch, one of the things that I have to acknowledge first is that these concepts vary greatly by tradition. There are some things that are sort of standard practice within what I would call British traditional Wicca and its close derivatives. That would be Gardnerian and Alexandrian Wicca, and then branches of Wicca that are pretty closely derived from those. You'll see very similar kinds of things being worn and used to denote different rank and that type of thing within the hierarchical structure of the coven. Elsewhere, it's kind of all over the place, which is freeing, but it can also be daunting when you're thinking about what you want to pick and use for your own magical practice. So let's talk first about the actual clothes that a person might wear. The robes, cloaks, tabards, sashes, all of that kind of stuff that a person might have that are made out of cloth of some type. Actually, they could be made out of leather as well, which isn't technically considered cloth, but you get what I'm saying. There is a trend in modern witchcraft to have a particular ritual robe that you've set aside for yourself, and I'm all about this particular trend. I like it. I like having something that's distinctly set aside for ritual practice, as opposed to like, oh, that dress that I wear all the time. Having something that's set aside like that lends a specialness or an otherness to the garment, so that when you put it on, you know that you're about to step in to ritual space, to magical space. It helps create that shift in your mind. However, I also know that our forebears certainly wouldn't have had special set aside specific robes necessarily. They would have had just their clothes, and that's what they would have been wearing, is maybe something that for them was suitable and practical to the work that they were doing at hand. You know, it's one of the reasons that I think that black is one of the preferred colors for witchcraft ritual robes, is because it's very concealing in the dark. If you're going out and doing things on the moors or in the woods, having a dark robe, a dark hood that you can put over your face, on your cloak, all of those things help conceal you a little bit more. And if somebody's coming by, you can even cover yourself a bit with that robe or that cloak, especially if it's very deeply hooded, and conceal yourself and camouflage yourself and not be seen. There is a preference because of the ceremonial influences on the ceremonial magic influences on Wicca and witchcraft practices for the robe to be a towel robe, this sort of T-shaped, very simple, very plain robe. But in a lot of ways, I think it's really important for us to understand that that comes out of like Golden Dawn practice, and then later, you know, OTO and this sort of like ceremonial fraternities of magicians who used that style of robe very specifically. And there was a lot of conversation and sharing of ideas between, for instance, Aleister Crowley and members of hereditary witchcraft traditions in Britain. Particularly, it's noted that he worked with one of George Pickingill's covens and with Gerald Gardner himself. So some of these ideas of the way the robe should look are very much influenced by that conversation that was happening, not just between those specific individuals, but between other individuals who were interested in the arcane arts at that time. The idea of being skyclad, on the other hand, clothed with nothing but the sky, being naked as a jaybird, is not particularly native to English witchcraft practice. In the Pickingill papers, W.E. Liddell, who is a grandson or great-grandson of George Pickingill, actually says that their hereditary practice does work skyclad, that type of nude ritual practice was something that was inherited from French craft and how French craft influenced their line of witchcraft. So this is an example of how you'll see some differences and variations. Gardner had actually been admitted to 2 different Pickingill covens over the course of his training. So some of the ritual nudity that's included within very British traditional Wicca lines may have very well been influenced from that Pickingill craft and that French craft, or what is described by Bill Liddell, at least, as being French craft. I haven't studied enough of French craft to say with authority whether or not French witchcraft historically is a nude practice. But I think it's safe to say that there's a lot of variation on that. Whether you choose to practice in the nude, or you choose to practice using ritual robes, or you choose to practice using everyday street clothes that are just like clean and ready for the work, really depends on what your mindset is and how it is that you view those garments. Are they an extension of you as a witch and a magician? Are they representing the body of the witch or the magician and acting as a concealment device in precarious circumstances? Or are they something that's just to get you to the ritual grounds and then you take them off and then you practice in the nude because you want to have nothing between you and the energies? Those are thoughts for you to ponder. I would suggest, though, that if you're using a ritual robe of any type, something that is a dedicated set-aside piece of clothing, that you can really experiment and play with what style of garment you like, unless your tradition specifies it has to be a towel robe or it has to be in this particular style, because that's what we all do and we have our reasons for it. But if your tradition just says it has to be a black robe or it has to be a white robe, or you have to have a black robe for the dark half of the year and a light robe for the, or a white robe for the light half of the year, which is what my tradition does, then you can really sort of choose what fabrics you like best. Do you want a wool robe? Do you want a silk robe? Do you want cotton, linen? You know, do you want something that mixes these fibers together in some way? Do you like a very flowy and drapey cut? Do you like something that's very like large and movable, and the only thing that would be a point of censure is the cords that you're wearing or a belt that you're wearing, perhaps, to keep ritual gear on you? You know, like maybe your knife is hanging from a sheath on your cords or your belt. These are considerations that you could have. There are lots of different styles that you can pick. A lot of witches, and this is in no way a judgment because I love historical costuming, and a lot of the YouTube channels that I follow are actually historical costumers, historical dressmakers, and that type of thing. But a lot of us do tend to like a particular historical style and tend to dive into that. So, you know, maybe you like a 17th century Irish style lin, or maybe you like a chemise à la reine, and who doesn't, really? Or maybe you just really like that towel robe that is so prevalent in magical societies. I tend to find it, I've made a lot of them. I've made a lot of that style of robe in my life. My shop used to actually offer linen robes, and I made a very Tao style robe. But I find that it's not very flattering to anybody that's not a very slender man. So if you don't come in slender male packaging, that robe style tends not to be very favorably cut for you. I know for me it's hard to get into the spirit of the thing if I'm fussing with bits of my clothes the whole time. I want to feel comfortable in what I'm wearing. So there are some other pieces that people wear besides just the robe. Some traditions, and again, this varies really greatly by tradition. Some traditions use other kinds of garments to signify, usually to signify rank within the tradition, you know, based on the degree that you've attained, or sometimes they're using it to signify a role within a ritual. So because this can vary so broadly, I'm just going to give you a couple of examples that are based on the tradition that I was trained in. In that tradition, we all wore robes of the seasonal colors. We actually had 5 sets of robes that we wore throughout the year. We'd have one each for spring, summer, fall, winter, and then we'd have another robe that was for the Samhain season specifically. So we'd have a black robe for that, but then we had a sort of a palette of colors that you could choose from for your robe for any of the other 4 seasons. That was nice in the sense that it gave us a lot of variety within the tradition, within the coven. We weren't all wearing necessarily exactly the same thing, and we did get to express sort of our sense of style. We got to choose things based on what looked good on us as opposed to what was fetching on the high priestess, which she was a redhead with pale skin, much like me, and the color palette that we might choose is not for everybody, right? And everybody wore that basic robe, some kind of basic cut, although you got to choose your cut as well. So you could either purchase it off the rack somewhere where somebody else had made the robe, or you could sew your own. And my high priestess, like me, was a seamstress and an avid costumer, particularly of historical, like Renaissance era costuming. So we had a lot of fancy things going on in our coven. If you attained the rank of 2nd degree in our tradition, you were allowed to wear a tabard. So you were allowed to wear this tabard over your regular robes, and we often chose then colors that would complement the other seasonal robes that we had on hand. If you attain the rank of 3rd degree, which was the 3rd and final initiation within our tradition, you could also wear a surcoat. So the tabard and surcoat both come out of medieval entering into the Renaissance design. For us, visually, that was one of the ways that we signified degree within the coven, in a way where you could just sort of look and see who was what degree level. Didn't necessarily tell you what they specialized in or anything along those lines. You know, you might have somebody who is a 3rd degree high priestess wearing the surcoat, or you might also have like a 3rd degree diviner or oracle worker also in the same gear. Some groups use sashes or other things to denote this, and some rely on the cords to denote this. So sometimes cords will have colors either added to them, or you'll braid a 2nd and then maybe even a 3rd set of cords that you would wear at on different parts of your body. So maybe instead of having your cords around your waist, those cords that signified your rank might be here on your neck. So some covens might use a special set of more slender braided cords to act as a witch's garter for people who had attained a certain rank. Very often the garter is only wearable by a person who has birthed or sired 3 other covens. So if you've started or had start because of your tutelage, you know, your students have been raised up through your degree system and then have gone off to start their own 3 covens, then you would be considered a witch king or a witch queen and be entitled to wear a garter. That's often how that one works, although some traditions have different ways for the garter to work. Whew! Let's take a quick break and get Reminder Lorelei to give us some reminders. Hey, it's me, Reminder Lorelei. And I want to say welcome to the channel if you're new, and welcome back if you've been here for a while. I just want to take a hot second to remind you guys that I have some links down in the description box below. You can get to my link tree to see what kinds of writing and other shenanigans I'm getting up to. I write for a publication called Evoke Publication, where the O is actually a 0. And we publish monthly on pagan witchcraft and lifestyle issues related to our community. So I'm writing mostly about traditional witchcraft. Shock. But there's some other stuff going on too that you might be interested in, like the Red Thread Academy, which is an online, interactive, self-paced, traditional witchcraft school. And you can decide what level of interaction you'd actually like to have with both me and the rest of the class. But the link for that is down below, and I'm also accepting submissions through the end of March for the Witch's Key to Goetic Familiars. So if the 72 spirits of the Legion, if you happen to work with one or more of those spirits and have some insights that you would like to share, some ritual bits, some poetry, some art, any of these types of things, I would love to see what you're getting up to. I put out new content here on the channel every week, Mondays at noon. If you want to keep up with that, click subscribe and ding that bell so that you can be notified when new stuff comes out. Thanks so much, and let's get back to content, Lorelei. Thanks, reminder, Lorelei. Now let's jump back into the content. Another piece of clothing that is super common to use as a witch is a cloak. People often confuse the term robe and cloak. So when I'm talking about a robe, I'm talking about something that's kind of dress-like or shift-like, chemise-like. It's going to have a body and probably sleeves with it, and possibly a hood that's attached just to it. And the reason for the hood, and some people use a hood or a veil as a separate garment altogether, but the reason for that hood or that veil is twofold. One, it's to act as that covering to be able to protect you when you're out and don't want to be seen. The other is that being able to cover your eyes is very helpful in inducing trance states. So if you're doing that seething work, that hedge crossing work, being able to pull the hood over your eyes and be able to block out visual stimulus while you're doing that work can be very helpful. There are some other reasons too that have to do with initiation and that type of thing. The idea of hoodwinking a person or hoodwinking yourself so that you're not seeing certain aspects of what's going on to cut off that one type of sensation has ritual implications as well. A cloak, on the other hand, is a piece of outerwear, not unlike a coat, but where we might not want to wear our big bulky winter parkas out to do ritual, although if you have to, you do, right? A cloak is something that's usually providing an extra layer of protection against the weather itself. So against the chill night air or against the outright cold, if it's, you know, distinctly cold, and against the rain. I highly recommend something called Melton wool for cloaks because they're going to rebuff the rain and stand up really well to rough wear if you're out trouncing about in fields and meadows and woods to do your magic work, which I hope that you have that opportunity, at least sometimes, to be able to do that. Some traditions do ascribe particular ritual values to the cloak itself, and others just see it as a purely functional garment that you can have or not have, depending on your preference. You're just likely to want one if you're doing a lot of outdoor ritual work. If you're doing a lot of indoor ritual work, then maybe not. The cloak gives you the opportunity to be skyclad, but still have that covering and have that hood and to have all of those benefits, but to still be naked in your right. So I've already mentioned the garter, which is usually reserved for somebody that's a high priest or high priestess, the devil, the queen, but then maybe has even been instrumental in founding multiple other covens. In some traditions, the number of buckles on the garter would denote how many covens have been spawned by that witch. Garters typically come in one of 3 different colors. You'll see them described historically as being blue or green or red. And then the buckles very often are silver. But they can be, as I mentioned already, braided. So that might be an area where you'd actually, if you were designing your own, you might braid red, blue, and green together to pull in all of the energies that those denoted. Another piece of witch regalia that is very commonly seen is actually one that I'm wearing right here. Let me just touch my mic. So the amber and jet necklace is described sometimes as one of the rings of power of a witch. Ring being that it is a ring around the neck in this particular case. Ours in our tradition are actually amber, jet, and bone, and we use, when we can, we use serpent bone, although other bone works as well. And it ties into what we view as the 3 sacred colors of witchcraft, and so you'll see that in our cords, in the clothing that we wear for ritual, and in our jewels. Another one of the rings of power of a witch is often a ring. This is often thought to be the most personal jewel of the witch because it is a finger ring that's going to be worn only by them, and that is often purchased, you know, to size. Like a finger ring has to be purchased or made to size for that person, as opposed to a necklace or cords, which can kind of be guesstimated or might be made on a specific formula of number of knots or length of the yarn or that type of thing. Many witches choose their ring themselves, and the coven isn't necessarily involved in that decision. Some traditions, though, do have a specific type of ring that is given at a particular marker within the initiatory process. Whether that's a bone ring or a specific kind of stone like moldavite, or another one of the tektites or something that's very much associated with craft lore, is, again, a choice for individual practice or for the trad practice. Another personal ring of power that we see within craft practice is that of the circlet or the headdress or the crown. These can go by different names, but they all usually imply the same thing. Often for female identifying witches, the crown will be a moon crown or a half moon crown or a crescent moon crown, like this. And for male identifying witches, traditionally it is a horned crown or a horned headdress, or a circlet or band that has a horned animal prominently displayed right in the middle. So there are a lot of different ways to make this and to acquire one of these. I particularly like a crown that is enclosed, or a circlet that's enclosed, because of the symbolism. Of course, it's not a circle because her heads are not circular. And the metals or materials that are chosen to make the circlet are often significant to either the individual witch or to the tradition as a whole. The last piece of jewelry that I'd like to mention is actually the cuff or the bangle. That's going to be something that you wear on your wrist. And you don't see that quite as often. It is one of the sort of the lesser known ones. We see examples of cords and rings and necklaces, especially the amber and jet necklaces, all over the place, and they're something that have been adopted by a lot of witchcraft practices. But the cuff we don't see as often. So typically the cuff is made out of copper, and it has the witch's craft name inscribed upon it, along with symbols that are particular to them. So this is something that if you have a little bit of skill in metalworking at all, you could possibly fabricate for yourself, or there are witchy jewelers online who make such a thing. The nice thing about copper being that it's very malleable and also a great conductor of energy. The cuff is also said to be one of the few pieces of ritual gear that we would wear outside of ritual, and it acts as a sort of identifier to other witches, without doing things like wearing pentacles or even triscles and that type of thing. In areas where the cuff is used more frequently, it would be recognized as that symbol of witchcraft. So I feel like you can't talk about witch regalia without talking about the cords. And I've actually done a whole other video on cords as ladders and how they work in that particular concept. The cord is steeped with magical symbolism and potent power because it's usually something that is crafted or braided as a part of an actual initiation or leading up, the workings leading up to initiation. The colors are very specifically chosen, either if you're self-initiating, either by yourself to represent those elements of the craft or of your power that you're weaving together, and then they're usually not just braided but also knotted, with the knots storing the energy of certain powers. On the very simplest level, the cords, these braided, woven cords, harken back to the weaver goddess, who is one of the faces of the witch mother. It is not uncommon in cords, in witchcraft cords, to see one end that looks a bit like a noose, or that has loops that are reminiscent of the noose, and another that is flails, and that's reminiscent of the scourge. And in this way, our cords remind us of some of the deep mysteries of the craft. Color symbolism for cords varies widely, but it is not uncommon to see black, white, and red cords just like this. Okay, folks, so once again, that's a lot of information, and I maintain that you can do it buck naked or with all of the bells and rings and fine array that suits your style of art, your sense of the art. Each piece has a meaning and a particular use and some symbol set that's sort of packed in behind it. So if you find yourself in a tradition that's using a lot of stuff, you know, a lot of ritual gear that you have to wear on your person and you don't know what all of it means yet and you think it's silly, give yourself some time to figure out and to absorb the wisdom of what those pieces mean, because most of the time we are not packing things into and out of our rituals without cause. I would love to hear your thoughts and comments, so drop a line down in the comment box and I will plan on seeing you next week with a new video. Bye, friends.